go big on May 5th. Alright, you're excited to go big. It's coming up, and I am excited about it. I like to hear that clapping. That's pretty good. I know for some of us in here, it might have been a rough week. It might have been at least one of where you're in a kind of a solemn mood, just considering the events of this week. Every time that there's a major event like the Boston bombings or the tragedy in West, the explosion in West, it's always, to me, I have to kind of say, is this something I need to speak to? Is this something I need to change the course of what we're doing to speak to? And I really believe that God had providentially already given me a message that is time perfect in this week. So I'm not going to speak specifically to those, but if those have affected you a lot, I really think that this message will speak to you in that. And I've had a couple of people that asked what we could do as a church to help them, and I just want to let you know that first of all, every time something like this happens, it's interesting the opportunities that God has to further His kingdom, even in the midst of tragedies. I have a friend that was about 0.2 of a mile away from the bombing when it went off in Boston. He was handing out invitations to a new church that's being planted there, and it's amazing to me that even in the midst of that tragedy, that God, in His foresight, was already putting a new church there, and putting a church there that's ready and looking, how can we help the people? How can we move through? God is moving even sometimes when we can't. And the tragedy in West, one of the first organizations that's always on the ground whenever we have a domestic event like this is the Texas Baptist Men. They were there within a day or so, just figuring out what they could do. And I've been in contact with them. If you would like to give, if you're just adamant, I'd like to give, they've pretty much got everything they need. But you can give school supplies. That's one of the things they said they could use, is school supplies. And so if you would like to donate school supplies, one of the schools apparently was destroyed or heavily damaged. If you would like to give a donation of school supplies, just email me or contact me or see me afterwards, and I'll collect those during the week. And I think on the 26th is when they're taking that shipment to West to give that and distribute it to those who need. But the main thing they need also is blood, and so you can find a card of blood care and give blood and just do it. Because Jesus, we want to show the love of Jesus, not because hey, it's a church thing. We just want to be the church, not necessarily always have to talk about Connection Point Church. This is a week where we can just be the church, and it's exciting to me when I hear these stories and I get to see the church just being the church. The tragedy is sometimes the time when opportunity for us to further God's kingdom and to show truth can really be highlighted. And so, as I was praying through this, I really decided, I'm not going to change my message, because this message today, at least the passage that I'm going to speak from today, it's going to be on page 198 in your Bibles, under your chairs, by the way. You can go ahead and find it. This is the same story that I clung to, that I held to when I almost killed our church at one time. When I was at a point in which, God has put this dream on not just my heart, on many of our hearts to build and grow this church. But there was a point in which, even though I had done what God had told me to do, even though I had led and been faithful to do what God had told me to do, we were at a point in which I really just felt as if this is just too far gone. I don't know how we're going to right the ship. I don't know how we're going to get into a position to keep ministering, to keep doing what we're doing, because very early on in our story, we started in 2010 in February, I knew that God had blessed us with a great worship leader. Wasn't the music great? I know Joey loves it when I do that. Wasn't the music great today? It is. Everyone I talk to about our musicians and our band, I'm like, listen, for any church over 100, if there was a competition, we would dominate it. That's all I have to say. Maybe even 500. I say even more than that. We've been blessed. And I said, early on, we really need to show a commitment to Joey. And really, I would love to see him on staff. And so we took a few months and we said, we're going to get ourselves in the best position we can. And we're going to bring him on staff. And it's still crazy for some people to think that we have 2 people on staff at a small church. That's not always the way you see it. But I just felt that God telling us we really need to make a commitment to a worship experience that we can be proud of and that can draw us to the cross every single week. And so we did this, and an exciting thing happened when we brought him on that first month of July 2010, we actually met our budget, which we weren't expecting to do, and I was like, oh, great, that's great, we took a step of faith, we dug a ditch, and God filled it, and it was great. And then you know what happened the next week? Or the next month? We were bleeding money, and we actually started hemorrhaging money, and it didn't just all of a sudden rise, and I was like, God, what are we doing? What's going on? Why didn't you show up? Oh, we took this step of faith, and we thought you were going to be here, and in a couple of weeks, a couple of months go by, and all of a sudden, I'm looking and I'm like, you know what? Our church can't sustain this much longer. We can't have 2 people on staff, and we've got this vision, this is close, we're moving forward. What are we going to do? And then I got a phone call. And that phone call was from the hotel we were meeting in. And they said, hey, we're going to double your rent next month. We just wanted to give you a week heads up. And I was like, oh my gosh. And it just seemed to be pouring. It seemed as if I had taken a step of faith. I was trying to go big. I was trying to do this thing that God had told me to do. And I spent this 1 week just devastated. I almost cried. I didn't cry, but I almost cried. I don't cry when I'm sad. I don't know. I cry when I'm happy. I cry when the Mavericks win the championship. That's the last time I cried, by the way. FYI. Now, I cried, but I was just devastated, and I was down. My wife was trying to console, and I didn't know what to do. And I started reading this passage we're going to read today, and I just started thinking and praying, God, how are we going to lead us out of this? And that led us to a campaign we did last year called Thrive. And Thrive actually came after 6 months of planning and pleading to God, sustain us. And we did this Thrive campaign. And what it did was it mobilized, it galvanized, it unified our entire church. And the power of just this campaign of mobilizing our church put us in a position not only to get to this building, but we started a missions program. We were able to get to build our buffer back up to where we can not have to make decisions financially. We were just being able to try to be the church and witness and help people. And all that came when we decided to unify as a church. But the interesting thing about that time was my prayer for this, like 6 months before we actually did that campaign, was, God, just get us through the day. Just get us to where, just help us out. And I think all of us have been in that point. You've been in a place where you had a dream. You had something that you really thought God had put before you. You wanted to do, and we're talking about go big. You wanted to go big for God. And at some point you get to a place where it feels like your dream is dying. It feels like your purpose, the very thing God wanted you to do, is going to be unable to happen now. And the only thing you can do is get on your knees and beg God, I need you to show up. How many of you have ever been in a place, and this isn't rhetorical, I want to see some hands actually. How many of you have ever been in a place where you actually said, God, I need a miracle. I need you to show up. That's what this message is about, and that's what this story, it really led me through a difficult time in our church when I didn't know how God was going to work, but I knew that He was going to work. And this story really impacted me. It's the story of Elisha. We've been going through the story of Elisha. It's Elisha meeting a woman whose life has just been wrecked. And I want you to see some of these points. And this is going to be a different kind of sermon in that I'm going to go verse by verse, and there are 3 points I'm going to hammer out. And one point might be really strong to you, and it might not be to the next person, and then the next point might be strong to them and not to you. And it's not a step-by-step. But as I was reading this, it just spoke to me on so many levels, starting from the context of a woman in dire need of a miracle. Now when the wife of one of the sons of the prophets cried to Elisha, your son, your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that your servant feared the Lord. But his creditor has come to take my 2 children to be his slaves. You have this woman who is really, she had given her life to the Lord. She was a pastor's wife, so to speak. They had forsaken riches just so they could serve God. And now, not only does she have a husband that has passed away, that gave his life serving the Lord, forsaking a lot of the things that he could have had, But now you have a story about to lose not only her house, but her children as well. Everything she has, she's about to lose. And in this moment, she's just thinking, and the first thing she says to Elisha is, listen, you know he loved God. When we talk about doing great things or going big, our whole purpose of having this Go Big campaign is that we want to unify our church to actually be the church and to go out and go big and do great things for God. But even in your own life, your own story, your own job, you have this desire, at least I hope you have a desire, I want to do big things for God. I want to make an impact that's beyond myself. But a lot of times, we get to a place like this where it starts going wrong, and the first reaction we have is, listen, God, I've been praying. God, I've been doing what I was supposed to do. How is it that my husband is dead, and now I'm going to lose everything? And I just want to go ahead and blow the end of the story for you. The husband doesn't get raised from the dead. This is not a story of resurrection. In fact, if anything, this setting tells us is that sometimes in the midst of us pursuing God and trying to be faithful to God, some of the rockiest storms of our life are going to come our way. And the solution that God is going to give us 9 out of 10 times is not to take us back to when everything was great. You know, it would be a perfect Bible story, wouldn't it? If Jesus would show up and he would heal the man and the man would be fine and then their family would be back together and everything. But she didn't get her family back. She didn't get her husband back. He's gone, okay? And so she has to move through this time. And it's a treacherous time. It's a hard time. But she's beginning to feel like God has forgotten her and that she's no longer useful to God. And that is what we want to speak to today. Because what she does, I think, is brilliant. And it's a little different than how most of us react to tragedy. If you've had a time in your life where something happened and your life is devastated, maybe it was a divorce, or maybe you lost a loved one, or maybe you lost a job, or maybe it was your kids moved away, or maybe you got kids, or something in your life just kind of changed everything about your life, and you're like, this is how it was supposed to be. And then all of a sudden it's not like that. Our reaction usually is to cry out to God. We usually cry out to God, God, why did this happen? Why? I've been trying to be faithful. I even went to church. I listened to Joel preach forever. Whatever it was. And we think, I've been doing this. But notice what she did. She didn't just cry out to God. She went and found Elisha. She went and found the guy who was known as the man of God. She pursued the presence of God as close as it could be identified to a man at that point. It's a brilliant thing to do, because most of us, we stop at crying out to God or blaming God. And we might even send up some wishful prayers. You ever do the wishful prayers? God, it would be great if. But she does a faithful prayer of, listen, I'm getting everything and I'm going before Him and I'm going to see God work on my behalf. And she goes before the man of God. This past week, I was sending out emails. Sometimes I send out emails to people that I haven't heard. And, if you come to this church a few times, sometimes I'll send you an email if I don't see you a couple of weeks. Just sometimes, especially if I know something's going on in your life. And I sent out an email to a lady that I knew was having the roughest, she's having the roughest year of all of us. I promise you, I would put money on it. Although that wouldn't be very Christian of me to do. So I wouldn't do that. She's having a rough year, and so I sent her an email. I just dropped her an email, and I said, I just want to let you know I'm praying for you right now. And I took some time right then to pray for her. And immediately, I got a phone call right back. I got a phone call, and she said, I just want to let you know my life is a wreck. My life is falling apart. And I saw your name, I saw that email, and I just knew that God wanted something, that God was still doing something. And she called me. She didn't even know what she was calling for. She just said, I just want to call and say, thank you for praying. Thank you for being here. Thank you. And her reaction is kind of like this woman's. We get to a point where we realize everything's going out of our control. I need to get close to God. And a lot of times we just, sometimes we have a tendency to look at the pastor, but every single week I tell you the same thing. Hey, let's go to Jesus. And I want to just say the first thing we should ever do is what this woman does, is go to the man of God. For us, that's Jesus Christ. Jesus is better than Elisha. He's actually the man that Elisha was prophesying about. He's the one that I speak about every week. So he's better than us. Whenever you face a burden, first step we always do, and this is so churchy, I know, but we've got to take our burdens to Jesus and lay them at His feet. The promises that Jesus made to us. He promised to provide for you. In Matthew chapter 5 and 6, go read that. He promised you that He would provide for you in every season of your life. That at least provision would be made. You know, you see a woman like this and you think she died poor. You think, or her husband died poor. You think, man, he must have not been blessed by God. But what we see in this story actually is when God begins to work is sometimes the miracles of God, the provision, the blessing of God, just providing for us is just as miraculous as when He pours out blessing. Just getting by sometimes when God provides, when you don't know how He's going to provide, is the greatest miracle. Some of us have survived things we don't think we should ever have been through, and that in and of itself is God's miracle. Jesus has one of the greatest calls in Matthew 11. He says, "Come to me, you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I'm telling you, God is prepared for whatever you're going through right now. And it starts not with a prayer of hope. It starts with you going to Jesus and saying, "Jesus, I'm in a place that I can't fix, but I'm going to trust. I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to do, I've dug the ditches. I've dug everything I can do. Now I am going to trust you." And we approach Jesus with a faith of knowing He is going to move on our behalf. And that's exactly what she does. And some of us in this room, if there's nothing else you get, I hope it's right now. If you're going through something and the rest of the sermon doesn't mean much to you, I hope you hear that word. Some of us right now need to learn how to simply approach Jesus and take where we are and give it to God. Some of us have never really trusted Jesus. That might be the next step that Jesus is calling you to take. Is, listen, I want you to trust me with your life. I want you to trust me even in this situation you think is hopeless. Now, some of us, though, would say, you know, I can do that. I can make that mental decision. I can trust, but I really don't even know how God's going to use my situation. I don't even know how God would use my family. I don't know how God would use me at all. The next thing that happens in this story is very, very inspiring to me. This spoke to me so many times, spoke into me so many times. Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what have you in the house?" It's a very peculiar question to a woman who has just lost her husband, being foreclosed on, and losing her family. It's pretty kind of crazy, question to ask. In fact, it's almost insulting, as if, hey, you got to give me something too, or I don't know what she was thinking, but it's just a weird question. And she said what anyone would have said. She said, "Your servant has nothing in the house. I've got nothing in the house. I've got a job, but I've got nothing in the house." How many times have you felt God calling you to do something? God, I would love to do that, but I don't have the ability. I don't have the money. I certainly don't have the time. Man, it's great that God wants me to take a step of faith. It's great that God wants to work in my life. I would do it. But God, how am I going to do it? I don't have anything. And it's funny, because the one thing that she had a jar of oil, is the one thing that caught Elisha's eye. And it just illustrates this problem, or the way that most of us handle problems. You have a hope or a dream, or God, I need you to show up in this situation, and the first thing we do is, I'm going to go buy a lottery ticket. Anybody ever do that? No? Right. God, I need you to just move big in my life, and we're always looking out there. And so this woman, she's asked for a miracle. The man of God comes up, is about to give her the miracle, and she's waiting for it to come from out there. She wants the magic bullet. She wants the fix. She wants, people to come and just fix her situation from outside. And the one thing that Elisha looks onto is what you have in your house. That question is so magical when we begin to look at this story. Think about my kids. Whenever you play or watch your kids play, and as my kids have grown up, when they're 3 and 4, it's awesome. They'll just play and play. Now I've got like a 7-year-old, and I got a 10-year-old. And the other day, what often happens, they come to me and say, "Hey Dad, can we play Xbox on TV?" And I'm watching TV, so I'm like, "No, you can't play. I'm watching TV. I'm doing something important here." And they always look at me and they say the same thing. "Well, we have nothing to play with." You ever done that to your parents or siblings? "We have nothing to play with." And I'm like, "Well, what about, you have Minecraft on your Kindle?" I said to my son. He's like, "Well, I really don't want to play it. That's really no fun right now, and my Kindle needs charge." "Well, what about your Nintendo DS?" "Oh, well, it's over there, and I really don't want to play Mario right now." "Well, what about those bazillion toys in the room that we call the toy room? What about those?" "No, there's really nothing in there for me to play with." It's amazing how whenever we really want something exciting to happen in our life, we're always waiting for it to just come and just stick to our faces and just hit us out of nowhere. And rarely is that how God works in your life. Rarely is that how. When we decided to start this church, I didn't cry, but it was another hard time in my life because I went through a time where I was like, how is this ever going to work? How is God ever going to actually make a church? It's just me. And selfishly, I was looking around, it's just me. And I read this story. This was one of the things that spoke to me. And I started looking around, you know what? God has already provided in so many ways. I have a brother who has stuck by me, and his family, and then there were several families that had already made a commitment to help start a church. And I just started thinking, and then we have speakers. We already had speakers and stuff. I started thinking about all the stuff we already had, and I was like, man, the only thing we don't have was a place. And then we got, we leased some space, and I started looking around, and I thought, every second I was looking at what we don't have. I was looking at what other people did have. And then it dawned on me, all the while, God has already been building up, and every major thing that has ever happened in this church. Never have we had just $1 million donation, although if you're up for it, I'm good. Never have we had that just happen in our church. What we have always had is, hey, here's the need, here's the direction we're going, and you guys, the people of God, the church comes together, and God always moves through us, not for us. He moves through us. So Elisha says this, and the woman has a decision to make. Do I trust God enough to think that He can actually use me, use what I already have? That's the decision. And some of you have that same thing when it comes to following God. God can never use me. I don't have anything. I don't have the knowledge to really be a champion for God. I don't really have the resources or the ability, or people aren't drawn to me, and they're drawn to other types. We all have this tendency to tell God what He can't do with us. But the challenge is for us to start saying, God, here's what I do have. I have a few of you that sometimes I just want to kick you in the shins when you tell me this, okay? Some of you have said, you know what? I got a lot of friends, but I don't think they would act, when we talk about coming to church, invite people to church. We want you to invite people to church. I don't know if that's a shock to you. We want you to invite your friends to church. Some of you will say, all my friends aren't really churchy people. They don't go to another church. So I really don't know. I don't have anyone to invite. And I always just, in my mind, if you ever say that to me, I'm like slapping my head 100 times. That's exactly who you should invite to church. I'm just going to go ahead and lay that out there. If you've got people that aren't connected and aren't walking with Jesus, and we have a church whose mission is to go from where we are to where God wants them to be, that means wherever they're at, we want them here, and we want to walk with them. That's the mission of this church. God's already blessed you with a resource that He's going to use to further His kingdom. Some of you are here not because you started the church. Most of us didn't start this church. Most of you are here because somebody invited you. And you turn around and do the same thing. And that's how God is going to use us. It's simply you looking around and saying, what has God blessed me with? whatever you're struggling with, I promise you, it's not a magic bullet that God's going to work through. Your miracle is going to come when you give Him something that He has already blessed you with. That is a principle that you should write on your hand. You should write it down, and you should remember. Whenever you're praying for a miracle, God is going to use something He has already blessed you with, if you'll simply trust Him and return it to Him. So she does. He said, go outside, borrow some vessels from your neighbors, empty vessels, and not too few. Then go in and shut the door behind yourselves and your sons and pour into all of these vessels. The one that is full, set it aside. So she went from him, and she shut the door behind herself and her sons. And as she poured, they brought the vessels to her. And when the vessels were full, she said to her son, bring me another vessel. And her son said, there is not another. The oil stopped flowing. She came and she told the man of God. And he said, go and sell the oil, pay your debts, and you and your sons can live off the rest. The last thing I want to kind of highlight in this story, we've already seen we can take things to Jesus. That's the first place we go, is we take our miracle request to the only one who can do a miracle, and that's Jesus. The second thing is, it's always going to come through what we have, not something out there. God's going to bless us with what He has already blessed us with. That's what He will bless us through. The last thing, though, I want us to notice is something that just dawned on me as I've been praying about a campaign. I don't know about y'all. Sometimes it seems gimmicky to go big campaign. You're like, oh, what a gimmicky thing. And it's really meant to not be gimmicky. It's really something I hope that will unify us. The reason is because the tendency, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, the tendency for us as we follow Jesus is to get very complacent in our life. Has any of you ever gotten to a point where you're complacent in your walk with God? You're complacent in your life. No, I know you haven't. No, they're looking at me like, Joel, I've never experienced that. Well, I want you to notice this principle. She starts pouring the oil, and it was a step of faith that she had taken to even get the jars, because he says, go get these empty jars. Now, I'm just going to tell you, if you came to me and said, Joel, I'm about to lose my home, and they're even going to sell my kids, and I said to you, you know what you need to do? Go to your neighbors and go empty their cupboard and bring me all the empty glasses. That's our solution. If I came to you and said that, you would walk out of here saying, that guy's a lunatic. That is the worst thing. You know, maybe if you're going to fill these jars with money or something, but we're not going to. He wants empty jars. And so imagine just the craziness of saying, you know what, I'm going to go to my neighbors and I'm going to ask them for just empty vessels, for empty cups, for empty jars. That's a step of faith in and of itself. And then this command, how many? Not too few. And it's interesting that the amount of blessing they're about to get is directly tied to the step of faith of them going door to door and asking for these vessels. The step of faith, the willingness of them to go forward and ask this unseemingly request, this just unusual request. That's the direct measure of what God is about to do on their behalf. But what really struck me as I watched this, or as I read this, is not just that the amount of blessing that God often moves in our life is directly tied to the steps of faith we take before Him, but it's when the oil stopped. Think about when the oil stopped. It stops as soon as they run out of empty vessels. And it just struck me. Here's a principle that if you're struggling with a complacent life, I want you to think about this. It's not in our emptiness, but it's in our fullness that hinders God from pouring out His grace. How many of you have ever been out with your friends, or maybe I remember back in college, this happened a couple times. You go out with your friends and you have a good meal, or you do whatever, and then for some reason you're like, you know what? I'm kind of tired. That was a great meal, but I'm going to go on home. I'm just going to go on home. Y'all go on out, and your friends are like, no, come on, it's going to be great, come on. And you're like, no, y'all just go on. I'm going to go back, and I'm just going to do my thing at the house or whatever. Y'all go and have a good time. And then like later on, you get like a phone call, or you talk to your friends, and they're like, man, we had the awesomest, the greatest night ever. Brad Pitt showed up and took pictures with all. Michael Jordan was handing out free basketballs, autographs. It was awesome. Yeah, and then like our favorite band just showed up out of the blue and played. And then it was just, everything was free. They just gave us all this stuff. It was fantastic. And you're sitting there thinking to yourself, oh man, all I got was like Chili's. And then I went home and I thought at that moment, I thought I'd had a great night. I'd spent it with my friends. I'd had Chili's. I thought I'd had a great night. But I was so full that I didn't get to experience the next greatest thing. Now, by the way, if you're under the age of 21, I am not telling you to go and stay out late at night. That is not what the message was about. But what I want to just illustrate is often, when we look around at our life and we wonder, where is God's grace? Why isn't God just pouring His Spirit out in buckets on my life? I would challenge us that most of us have already filled our buckets with other things, and that being full, that idea of being full in our lives on other things, has led to a complacency in which we're missing out on God's grace in our life simply because we're full. Some of us, if I were to say, why can't you go bid for the Lord at your work? Well, I don't have the time. I don't have the time to really give to and do a lot of great things for God. We have that feeling sometimes, and we're full, and then we wonder why. We never seem to experience, peace spiritually, except when we're at church. If you want, 1 hour of your week to be focused and be filled with God, and that's all you give to Him, it's no wonder that's all we'll be filled with. If you give Him 2 parts of your life, there's a good reason why you're only about 2/5 as full as the rest of the people that you see. And you go and you see those people that are full. And every time I meet someone that is pouring out with the Spirit of God and that is just at peace with where they are, it always happens when they're empty. When they've been so empty and all they can do is rest on God. God, I've got to trust you here because I don't have what I think I need. Or God, I don't know how you're going to get me through this, but I'm at peace because I'm trusting you. Always it comes from people who are not overbooked and they're not overfilled, but instead they're looking to God to fill them. Complacency, as we get going with this Go Big thing, the complacency is the #1 thing. We cannot be a church that is complacent. We cannot be a church that fills our schedule, that fills everything about our lives, that we say we can't give financially because we don't have money to give. We can't be full without at least asking the question, what has God already blessed me with that I could return to Him? If we're asking God to move in our life, and whatever you're going through, you're asking God to move in your life. The first thing you got to understand, or the second thing you got to understand after you get to Him, is you've got to give Him room to move. God, I don't have 6 hours to give to you, but I got an hour, and I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to quit wasting it. God, I don't have a lot of money to give to you, but I got a little bit, or I got something, and I'll give it to you. I will give you what I have so that you can move through me, not just for me. I'm excited. I'm so excited about the next few months of this church as we unify and begin to celebrate us taking steps of faith. I'm excited. In 2 weeks, we're starting this Go Big campaign. We're going to try to unify as a church and be a church that's known as taking steps of faith. And I'm going to ask you in 2 weeks to make some commitments. And I'm actually going to ask you to write them down, okay? We're actually going to write them down in this church. And if it's your first time here, or if you've been here 100 times, you're invited to take part in this. I'm going to ask you to make 4 commitments. On May 5th, the first commitment I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to make a commitment to the amount of people you think you can invite and bring to this church. How many? For some of you that are, not that good looking or popular, maybe 2 to reach. I don't know if there are any of those people in here. I don't think there are. All of us are very good looking, suave people. But I want to challenge you to begin thinking about, what are you going to give to God? What are you going to commit to doing? And another thing is that we're going to try to do 1,000 acts of service. And these aren't to pump up our church. These are acts of service in which we're simply going to go out and serve people and tell them Jesus loves them and try to point them to Jesus. And I'm going to challenge us in 2 weeks to make a commitment How often am I going to do this? Because if we just go into it thinking I'm going to do this, you'll never think about it. So I want us to make a commitment that I can follow up and I can encourage us to keep moving forward and keep going. And I want to encourage you, how many times a week can I actually say, you know what, I'm going to go out right now and I'm going to look for the opportunity to serve somebody in the city and then to show them who Jesus is, or at least that Jesus loves them. And it might be something simple. In a simple way that you can show somebody and tell somebody Jesus loves them. I want you to make a commitment. I'm going to actually try to do this once a week. I'm going to try to do this, 100 times. That's great. If the way there, you do that. Another thing is, we're going to try to give financially. And on that day, not only can you bring your gifts in 2 weeks, we're going to have an offering where you can actually bring and give to the mission. We're going to try to give $10,000 away just to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. But I want you to be thinking about it. Maybe it's not a lot, but it's something, and you have something you can give. And the last one that we're asking you to do is I want you to think, what is it that you're going to do to mark this year? And I want you to be praying and thinking about that. And in 2 weeks, I want you to come and say, this is what I'm going to try to do to make this year the year that I'll always remember. It could be something fun. It could be something, I've heard there's a rumor of a bunch of guys getting together a skydiving trip. I'm just saying. Now, it could be something fun. But for you, it could be something, this is the year I'm going to try to really get serious with my faith. Maybe this is the year you're going to start trying to read your Bible. And I want to hear your commitment in 2 weeks. I want you to make that commitment. And understand, all this thing is about is us doing just this. We're not asking you to give beyond what you have and take a step of faith. Hey, I'm going to give this money. I don't know where it's coming from. We're not saying, hey, I don't know where my time's going to come from, but all I'm saying is look at your life in the next 2 weeks. And what would it be like if we actually sat down and figured out, what do I have in my house? What do I have in my house that I could give to my church, that I could give to God, so that He could move through me, not just for me? I think your faith in the next 2 months or 6 months is going to be so just multiplied when you begin to see God doing great things through you. But anytime you come before God and you're just praying, I need a miracle, remember, go to Jesus, take it to Jesus. And then you always ask, what's in my house? What has He blessed me with? And then the last thing is you simply say, you know what? Maybe the reason I'm not getting blessed because I'm full. It's maybe the reason that I don't even want to get up and go to church, or I don't even want to be a part of a campaign in church, is because I'm already full. Some of us might need to stop doing some things and say, you know what? I've got to stop doing these things to make room so that I can empty a little of my schedule or empty a little of myself so that I'll have room for God to move in me. And I'm telling you right now, no matter where you are right now, no matter if you think your situation is dead, I believe God is about to do a miracle in your faith and in the complacency of our lives. And it starts with us preparing, and that's what we are doing in this series. We are preparing for a go big move of God. And I'm excited about it. Y'all excited about it? Yeah. Let's have a little prayer. Let's pray. That was kind of, some of y'all excited about it, some of y'all, we'll see. Lord, I know for a fact that you are a God who moves mountains. You are a God who creates simply with your words. And whenever we call on a God as powerful as you, we know that you are capable of moving on our behalf. Lord, I pray that this week you'll begin to challenge us. You'll begin to move in us so that we won't walk around as if we're filled. We won't walk around filling ourselves and missing out on the opportunities that you have for us, simply because we're trying to fill our jars ourselves. Lord, I pray that you will move in this church, and everyone in this church today, I pray that you will motivate us to begin looking at how we can be filled by your Spirit. And Lord, I pray that instead of always praying for miracles out there, that you'll begin to just help us move and trust you with the things you've already given us, the relationships you've already given us, all of the things you have put in our control and our sphere. Lord, we want to give them to you, knowing that if we trust you with our lives, if we trust you with what you've given us, you will always bless us. You will go most of all, we want to come to you. We want to come before Jesus and just know this is an act of trust. Everything we do in this life, we come to you expecting you to move through us, not us moving on our own. Lord, we pray that you will bless this church this week. Pray that you will move through us and let us be a light to our city and to this